Have you ever closed a book or, finished binge watching an entire season of a show and felt like you were somehow different? Like a little piece of the main character just kind of stayed behind with you? Well, I've got good news. You are absolutely not imagining things. In today's explainer, Fictional Realities, How Characters Reshape Your Brain and Identity, we're going to dive into how getting totally lost in fiction doesn't just entertain us. It literally rewires our real-world identities, our social behaviors, and yep, our very brains.
So let's start with a really bizarre yet completely universal human experience. Why in the world do we mourn the loss of people who never even existed? Think about it. Think about the very real gut-wrenching grief or shock you might have felt when Aunt May died in Spider-Man, or when a beloved character met their tragic end in a novel like The Book Thief. Researchers actually call this a parasocial breakup, and let me tell you, it can cause genuine, literal anguish and loneliness. But why? Why does our brain care so much about a made-up story? Well, to figure that out, we have to look under the hood at the actual hardware of the brain itself.
Okay, let's dive right into this with Section 1, the fiction, illusion, and your brain. Because what is actually happening inside your skull when you connect with a character is a full-blown illusion that your brain completely buys into.
So, cognitive neuroscientists have pinpointed this specific region in the brain. It's called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or VMPFC for short. Now, usually, this area lights up like a Christmas tree when you think about yourself. When you're pulling up your own memories or judging your own personality traits. It is basically the control center of your self-identity. It also fires up a bit when you think about your close friends. But here is the massive aha moment. Neuroimaging shows us that when we are deeply, completely immersed in a story, our brains use this exact same self-referential neuromachinery to think about fictional characters. No difference.
To show you just how deep this rabbit hole goes, let's look at this incredible study out of Ohio State University. Researchers actually shoved 19 hardcore Game of Thrones fans into an fMRI machine. They asked these fans to evaluate traits, like is this person lonely, or are they trustworthy, for themselves, for 9 of their real-world friends, and for 9 Game of Thrones characters, and the results were wild. For the participants who scored high in trait identification, which basically means people who really absorb themselves into a character's headspace, there was a massive neural overlap in that VMPC area we just talked about. When they evaluated the character they felt closest to, their brain activity was nearly indistinguishable from when they evaluated themselves. They weren't just watching Jon Snow or Arya Stark. Neurologically speaking, they were completely merging their own identity with them.
Which brings us to Section 2, rehearsals for real life. Because it turns out, this brain mechanism isn't just a quirky glitch, it actually functions as a highly sophisticated social simulator for our daily lives.
As psychological researchers like to point out, stories are rehearsals for life. Fiction isn't just mindless escapism, guys. It's actually a low-risk flight simulator for your brain. Get this, 4 of the 5 brain areas that are active when you're engaging with a story are the exact same ones that fire up when we navigate real-world social situations. By watching a character stumble through obstacles, we are safely honing our own social intelligence. It literally builds our fluid intelligence, our ability to adapt on the fly, and it radically boosts our empathy, all because we're practicing how to understand other human beings in a totally safe, consequence-free environment.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates just how deep that simulation goes. Think about psychologist Erik Erikson's stages of human development. If you look at them, they map perfectly onto the characters we end up loving. We are drawn to characters because they explicitly mirror our own universal life crises. Like a teenager who's grappling with their own identity and role confusion, they are naturally going to gravitate toward a coming-of-age protagonist who's navigating moral ambiguity. It's like a giant puzzle. We literally resolve our own real-life developmental crises by proxy when we watch fictional characters successfully overcome those exact same struggles.
But, it's not just about overcoming everyday obstacles. That brings us to Section 3, Archetypes and the Shadow.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how it ties into Carl Jung's theories. Jung believed that our psyche is built on these universal blueprints called archetypes. And I want you to consider the stark contrast between 2 of the most important ones, the persona and the shadow. The persona is our safe, outward mask of social conformity. It's the polite, smiley face you show to your coworkers at the office. The shadow, on the other hand, contains all our repressed, socially unacceptable impulses, the aggression, the raw ambition, the vulnerability. And here's the thing, we need a way to safely explore this shadow without completely ruining our real lives. And fiction? Well, it provides the absolute perfect outlet for that.
So, when we encounter archetypes in media like the hero, the seeker, or the wise old man, think Luke Skywalker or Obi-Wan Kenobi, it taps directly into what Jung called our collective unconscious. We don't have to be taught to understand these characters, right? We just recognize them instantly, on a deep psychic level. Engaging with these ancient recurring symbols actually pushes us towards psychological wholeness, or what Jung called individuation.
But that raises a huge question, which brings us to Section 4, the anti-hero paradox. If we're using fiction to strive for wholeness and moral goodness, why in the world are we so busy rooting for the villains?
Seriously, think about characters like Dexter Morgan, Darth Vader, or Tony Soprano. Normally, if someone lied, manipulated, or, harmed others in real life, we would absolutely despise them. But to enjoy a really compelling anti-hero narrative, audiences use this brilliant psychological trick called selective moral disengagement. It's a concept identified by the psychologist Albert Bandura. Basically, first, we temporarily disable our own moral code, then we just kind of ignore or justify the character's bad behavior, or even blame their victims. And we do all of this just so we can keep our positive feelings for the protagonist without suffering any personal guilt. We literally grant them absolute amnesty.
But I gotta tell you, there is a darker layer to this affinity. I want you to picture your absolute favorite bad guy in media right now. Got him? Well, research shows that our enjoyment of these dark characters is often linked to our own hidden dark triad traits. We're talking about subclinical levels of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy that are just hanging out in our Jungian shadow. Fictional anti-heroes actually act on the forbidden impulses that we have but just cannot safely express. They get to do exactly what they want, completely unconstrained by social norms, which allows us to vicariously blow off some steam without ever threatening our own positive sense of self.
All right, so how does this translate to real-world impacts when we finally close the book or turn off the TV? Let's look at Section 5, Reshaping Your Identity.
Psychologists call this blending process experience taking. It happens entirely spontaneously when you temporarily deactivate your own self-concept, forget your own demographics and beliefs, and just fully simulate the subjective mindset of a protagonist. But guys, it is so incredibly delicate. In one fascinating Ohio State experiment, researchers found that if participants were reading in a cubicle that just happened to contain a mirror, the spell was completely broken. Being reminded of their own physical reflection causes heightened self-awareness, which entirely blocked the neural overlap required for experience taking. You literally have to lose yourself to become the character.
So the crucial point here is when experience taking does happen, it alters our real-world behavior in absolutely astonishing ways. Check this out. Days before the 2008 presidential election, researchers had students read a story about a character overcoming obstacles to cast a vote. For the students who read a first-person story about a character from their own university, which totally maximizes that experience-taking effect, a staggering 65% of them actually went out and voted in the real election days later. By contrast, only 29% of students in the control group voted. Think about that. Just reading about a fictional character voting dramatically changed their own civic behavior in the real world.
And honestly, it goes way beyond voting. Bonding with characters actively dismantles real-world prejudice. In another study, heterosexual students read a story about a day in the life of another student. When the character's homosexuality was revealed late in the narrative, like after the reader had already formed a deep experience-taking bond, the readers reported significantly more favorable attitudes toward gay individuals and relied way less on stereotypes afterward, compared to when the trait was announced early on. Similarly, female viewers who formed bonds with female political leads on television showed massively increased political engagement. Basically, by befriending diverse characters in a low-risk fictional setting, our brains actually become far more inclusive in reality. All of this brings us to this incredibly powerful realization from the research. Human beings are constructed of the narratives they consume. The boundaries of the human self are not static, guys. They are infinitely elastic. Every single time you step through the sliding glass door of a novel, or you hit play on a new series, you are incorporating fictional identities directly into the neurobiological architecture of your own self-concept. You are quite literally evolving alongside the characters that captivate your imagination.
The stories you choose to immerse yourself in are quite literally building the person you are going to be tomorrow. So the next time you sit down to start a new book or binge a new show, you really have to ask yourself, who will you become next?